Alright, so I'm going to start with distress markers. I'll talk about that. So if you guys have any questions on these pens, that's kind of the whole purpose of this. I hope to answer as many questions as I can. I know, then you put them all out and it's like, yeah, a little water.
How was dinner last night?
Hmm?
How was dinner last night?
It was alright. When you go with too many people, like your food takes, I think there was like 20 of us or something.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of a banquet. Okay, so I'll talk about the distress markers. This is the newest launch that I did with Ranger. These pens, there are 37 colors in the release, 36 distress colors, and white picket fence. So this one is kind of a little different than the rest of them, so I'll set it aside and we'll talk really about these to start out with. Cool thing about these markers, first of all, they coordinate with all the distress colors. That's kind of a favorite. Second of all, though, they have some unique properties that are different from water-based markers, and that is the fact that these are reactive with water, as true distress inks are. When they get wet, they actually travel out across the surface. That's the most important thing. Second of all, they actually maintain their color integrity. So if you want to use them directly onto a surface, you can color with them. Or if you want to go in and blend them with water or watercolor with them, they will actually keep their color and just become a translucent version of that color. So unlike most water-based pens, when you get them wet, the color just kind of washes away. Distress doesn't do that, so that's pretty nice. I'm going to go ahead and demo on a new surface we have called specialty stamping paper. This is a coated paper. We sell it in 8.5 by 11. We also sell it in ATC size. I just put a piece out on the table, so if you guys want to feel it, you can. It's pretty cool because it's a matte coated paper, but it definitely has a strange, unique coating. And one of the things I like most about this paper is the fact that you can use any of our products on this paper. So you can use alcohol ink, you can use Distress, Adirondack, absolutely. So if you like to work with alcohol inks, but you don't necessarily want every project to be glossy cardstock, you can go ahead and utilize this. And it's the same on both sides, which is cool. It's exactly the same, yeah. It's just not going to be shiny, but it is a coated paper, and that's why it allows you to utilize your inks. So it's pretty neat. So I'm going to go ahead and work with a stamp.
Thank you, though.
This is a good little stamp to demo with. You can tell I've used it a lot so far.
That's mine, just move it.
It's just easy enough.
Okay.
All right, let me just spritz that with a little water, just clean off whatever was on it. All right, so I'm just going to start by stamping. I'm going to go in and stamp with archival ink. Now, archival ink is a waterproof ink. We're going to do some colors with this, so when you're doing coloring, you want to make sure that you're stamping with a permanent ink. Now, I'm going to stamp just on that specialty stamping paper in archival, and then I want to show you the same stamped image just on, I'm going to work on the back side of glossy just to show you kind of a matte paper, just so you can see the difference when it comes to stamping. What a big difference that paper makes. It certainly does. So you've got significant detail and you've got a really crisp image when you're working on that paper. And you can utilize really whatever stamping ink you want on specialty stamping paper. So if you don't use archival, use other permanent inks, you can do the same thing. So I'm just going to dry this with a heat tool. It's not important that you heat set your image, so to speak, but it has to be dry. So I don't want to wait for this to air dry, so I'm just going to heat it with a heat gun. Yeah, speed it up a little bit. You know it. There you go. All right, so once this is dry, we're going to talk about the pens themselves. Now, the pens, the cool thing about this, it is a dual tip marker. One end has a brush tip, and the cool thing about that brush tip is it's actually going to give you a wide stroke like a brush, or you can actually use the tip like a paintbrush to go back and forth. So you can achieve any little effect you want with the nib of that. The other side is a fine point. So this is actually a plastic nib. So what I love about it is that it will always stay that detailed nib. So you can use it for journaling, you can do outlines of stencils, but any detail work you have, you don't have to worry about the tip of this frame because it's plastic. So some properties to know about the inks. Well, because they're reactive with water and they're blendable with water, that's the only thing we need to use to mix the colors. So we're going to work with the water brush. So I released 2 water brushes at this show with Ranger, and these are kind of my favorite style of water brush, and that's the one that has that little valve that will control the flow of water. And so when you put this together, it's really significant about the tips of it. First of all, this is a detailed tip. So you can see from the tip of that brush, it actually goes to a point. So I can use just the tip of it, and this is a self-feeding water brush, so when you press the bristles down, it will distribute the water. So I can use the tip for detail, or it will actually work as a brush, because after all, it is a water brush. So you can use actually the bristles to get a little wider stroke in that. But every time you color with it, it always goes back to a point. So that's nice. The second one I did because I wanted to do backgrounds, or maybe you want to work on a tag or a canvas, is I actually did a flat water brush. So this chisel water brush is really nice because I can do a flat tip to go across the surface, or if I want to cover a larger area, I can actually remove this, and now I have longer bristles that I can go in and do washes of color or stain and rinse it out. And then when you're done, you can just put this right back in and snap it back on. So pretty simple. I know I like them. They're really fun to create with. So let's go in and color this image. So the ink is reactive with water, and because of that, and it's a unique property of the marker, people ask, well, what surfaces can you color on? Well, you can color on specialty stamping paper. You can color on anything you use distress on, which is like manila, cardstock, sticky back canvas, ribbon, any of that. Even glossy paper. Distress works on glossy, so either the matte side, so here's kind of the matte surface of that, or the glossy side. You can actually color on glossy, and it will dry on glossy paper as well. So you can still utilize these inks on different surfaces. But keep in mind that they are reactive with water, meaning these markers will never become permanent. They'll never become waterproof. So anytime they get wet, that ink is going to react, just like distress does. Now on glossy, because it's clay coated, you notice it doesn't wick as much. It just starts to slowly fade out on the other side. On matte paper, it starts to wick as well. So that's kind of a neat thing, especially if you want to do any sort of drawing or doodling. You can have that react and get you a pretty cool kind of graffiti look. So let's go in and start coloring. So when I go to color with this, I'm just going to go in with different colors of the pens, and I'm just going to use the brush tip. Now if you're working a lot with them, or maybe you're demoing with them, one of the things that people say, well, how do you know to always pick it up and open the brush end? The brush end is going to be opposite the barcode. So if you just look at it, that's what I've figured out over the last 3 days. If you just glance down, find the barcode, open the other end. All right.
Now, how long did it take for you to figure that out?
It took me the first hour of the demo. That's it. I mean, I knew right away, but then it took me a while to kind of trigger my brain to not look at anything other than look for the barcode. All right, so after you color on this, you can leave it as is. In other words, I can go in and actually blend with the markers. So if I wanted to go in and take a lighter color, I could go in and blend with that lighter color and never worry about contaminating the markers, because these markers won't contaminate the same way the distress pads don't contaminate. So if I want to keep the colors vibrant, I would go in with a lighter color and blend with that. But if I want to go in and blend this color and create a softer look, I can go with my water brush, and because these are reactive with water, really go in and see how I can pull that other color down into the first color. If you want to color outside the lines, I can also take this and just see how it reacts with water. So all you have to do is really just touch the edge of it, and you can blend that color out. It doesn't take a lot of ink at all. Pretty simple. So you can see as this is drying, you just go in and kind of zap that with a heat tool just to get that water to dry. The one that I blended with the pen, you can see the colors stay a little bit more vibrant, whereas the ones that I watered out, because that ink reacts, it's taking it away, it becomes a little lighter. Cool thing is you can go back and still add color anytime. So if you decide after you blend it, oh, you know what, I want to add a little bit more color in there, you can still go back in with your markers and you can fill that in, but now you're not going to have any of those harsh lines because you already have that kind of foundation of distress. And you can really go in and punch up these colors. That's what I love, is that they automatically just integrate into what was down there. So you don't have to think about what you're doing. You don't have to work light to dark or anything like that. You just put in colors and go in and blend and blend and blend. But it gets better, I think. Another thing I like to do with these is actually stamp with them. So I'm going to go in with the markers, and I'm going to color directly onto a stamp. Now this may not be new to a lot of people, but I'll show you some really cool tricks that you can actually do with this. So I'm just adding little shades of color, and I'm actually blending right onto the stamp. So remember, you don't have to worry about contaminating. You can go right in with those markers. and just utilize whatever colors you want here. And I'm just using the brush tip of the marker. Now, as far as open time, you have unlimited open time for this, meaning you do not have to rush and get all of your colors down in a certain amount of time. You can go in, no, because we're gonna just breathe a little breath on it and bring it right back to life. So you could go in and color this, and you could actually come back another day, another time, and you can still stamp with it. So it's not like you've got to like, oh, I've got to get this all colored, I got to get this figured out. You don't. You can really go back and layer this. Let's do a little bit of wild honey up here. Do some stormy sky down here.
Have your favorite color yet?
No, not yet. I mean, I've really worked with a lot of them so far, so I don't have a favorite that I seem to go to a lot. A couple of the reds I like, but no, I think I've actually used Worn Lipstick more than I've ever used Worn Lipstick Distress, which is kind of odd. It's a pretty cool pink color. So you'll see on the stamp that the ink looks fairly dry, but you do see a little reflective property, so there is ink on there. If you wanted to, you could take a stamp and you could spritz it with water and stamp it. That's going to give you that cool reactive look. But if you wanted something that was a little more detailed, all you have to do is just breathe. Just one breath on it. You don't need to lick it or, you know.
Because you're like over,
yeah, just one breath on it. That's right. And then we're going to stamp. And what I love is how everything just blends right on the stamp. So any of the color that you put in, it's already blended with the marker. So you don't have to worry about making mud. You saw those colors I was putting on, you thought, this is just going to be a mess. No. But it actually stamps really, really crisp, unlike most markers that will simply bleed out into the surface. Gives it a nice little effect. And the cool thing is you can actually go and stamp again. You could get a second generation with that same thing. I've stamped it about 3 times. Each time you're just going to get a little lighter generation, but you still get some really great detail, which I like. So I'm just going to clean this off just with a little bit of water. And let's talk about utilizing this. So if I wanted to go and color this, I could go in just with my water brush, and this is where the detailer really comes in handy. I can go in and just blend a little bit of that color without going over the entire image, because keep in mind, this one our image was black, so you could really layer it, but this, our image is all marker. So if you brush over the whole thing, you're going to really create a lot of blurry lines. If you decided that you wanted to add a color, so let's say on this one we wanted to add a little bit of, I don't know, fired brick, you can just take the marker, do a swap out there, and just pick up some of that color. And the beauty of this is just adding some of that ink. And this is what I was saying about it maintaining its color integrity. So even though I'm blending that out, it's still going to keep the same color properties that Distress does. So I can go around this with a little bit of water. You'll notice that as I'm doing this, I'm constantly wiping the water brush off on the craft sheet. That's the best way to clean your brush. You don't want to clean it off on a paper towel, because if you clean it off on a paper towel, it's going to suck the water out of the bristles, and you're not going to be able to blend it as well. So that one's watercolor, that one we actually colored and blended. What about something like this? Well, it's reactive with water, so if you spray it, you're going to see your image react. If you got it really wet, you can see it really react. If you didn't like that look, you can just wipe it off and your image will still be there.
Oh.
Wow.
It's just going to be a lighter generation because it reacted some of that ink, but a lot of the ink stayed on there because it's a coated paper.
So it's
this is a pretty cool
embedded
ghost stamping
itself
because
underneath.
it's coated, so your first layer is always going to be there.
That's awesome.
Yeah, because of that paper. So now we're going to talk about some background. So we've seen different ways to color with the markers, but it gets really, really nice because of how they work with the existing Distress products. They work really well with stains. They also work really well with your Distress ink pads. So here's a couple of things to point out. Let me grab my palette. So these are the ink palettes. This is just an empty palette that Ranger sells. It's a hinge lid. It's got a jewel lid on the top. I've got one with alcohol ink, one with perfect pearls. This one I use for my Distress stain. So you can just take your bottle of stain, put it in the well, squeeze the bottle, and you have some Distress in there. And what I like about coloring with this versus a re-inker, as much as I love the re-inkers are concentrated. That's what we use to re-ink the ink pads. So if you've ever tried to color with those, you know that first little dip of the brush, that color is really intense and you've got to like try to work it out. Using the stains, what you see is what you get. So when I dip this in broken china, I'm going to have broken china right from the beginning. So I can really utilize it to create a nice watercolor effect or wash on my paper. Now if I want to, I can go in with this, pick up some broken china, and actually go over the whole entire thing. But you'll notice one thing, that it doesn't affect my markers. So even though I'm going over the whole thing with blue, my yellow is still yellow, my red is still red. Yeah.
But it's water, so how come it's not red?
It's distress. Because it's really stained.
Oh.
Oh, sorry. Oh.
Distress. Yeah.
Yeah.
Distress. Yeah. So if I want, I can flick some water over that. You know, that's going to manipulate that stain a little bit. And I can dry this. And you could still, at this point, go back with markers if you wanted to. And you can go back and color some of that, because remember, we did go with stain, but we also went over with water. So it did pull some of that color from that center butterfly up, but it didn't contaminate your whole background, which I think is super, super fun. Oh, it gets better. It does. It gets so much better. So yeah, at this point, if you decided, well, you know what, I still wanted to go back and, you know, I didn't like how watered out that got, okay, I'll go in and I can still add right into that. Not worry about muddying anything up. Maybe I want to go in with the detail part, so I'll take my fine nib and just go in and really saturate those areas. So cool, it just brings it right back to life. So something like this, I want to ink it. Now I probably won't go so extreme with the water because I don't have a stamped image. So if this whole thing smears out, it's going to be a little bit of a mess. So I'm just going to go with my blending tool and use my distress ink. And quite honestly, most people, when they go to use their blending tool, you know, they're going to try to stay around the edge and be really careful. But with these markers, you don't have to do that. I can go right over the entire thing, and I don't have to worry about any of my inks mudding up. My pink is still pink, the yellow is still yellow, my turquoise is still turquoise, because it's distress. Because all of these inks are designed to be compatible. That's why when I said they're distress markers, they really are formulated to work with distress. So I'm going to go in and take a little bit of water, just flick it on top. Now because this is specialty stamping paper, it's got a great bleaching quality that right away you lift it off and you get those really cool watermarks. So I could stamp in water if I wanted to. I didn't even have to splash it on, I could just stamp right over that. I'm just going to let that dry. I'll wipe off this water and I'll still go around the edge with another color of distress. I'll go around kind of a little darker if I want to. You can do perfect pearl mists over this, anything like that. But I love the effect this gives because of just how intense that color still is, even with those markers. So two very unique ways to work with the distress markers when you're coloring. Stamping with them and inking, or stamping and then coloring in. But wait, there's more, because there's white. There's like, what's with the picket fence? Well, I wanted to design an ink that was white to actually create some highlights. The same thing when I did stains, that I wanted to do white picket fence. Because sometimes you just need that little punch of white in a background. This is not a paint pen. This is not a white opaque gel pen. This is actually a marker. So there's white ink in there. And you can use it on colored surfaces, or you can actually use it on darker surfaces like black cardstock or even craft. And so when you work with this, I mean, what's really crazy about it is that when you draw it out, it goes on clear, but it'll dry white. So when you put it on craft, it goes on clear, but it'll dry white. So if you really color on that same area, when it dries, it's actually going to dry even more opaque than the first layer. So you get to decide the intensity or the opacity of this pen when you're working with it on a surface. If you wanted to work with it on something you've already colored, you can still go back, and let's say we want to go in this butterfly and just add a little white highlight. Remember to put it on there and wait for it to dry. Because when you first do it, you're like, oh, I don't know if it's getting on there, but see, as it dries, it gets that milky look. If you like kind of the organic nature of that, the fact that it's just kind of has that little white haze right there, that's fine. but most of the time I like to blend it out. And that's another important thing about this. It had to be an ink. It couldn't have been the white opaque pen, because a gel pen you can't blend. You put it on, it's done. This, because it is ink, I can just go in and paint that and just put that right in with that yellow, put that right in with that red, and it just gives that whole area just a little bit more of an opaque highlight, which is nice as it dries. It is cool because I also like the ability to utilize the fact that this is an ink and it's a marker, so I can go in with a stamp, and if I had a stamp, maybe, I don't know, this is a big stamp, but I don't care. If I want to do this on a smaller stamp, I'm going to take this and I'm going to use the marker directly on a stamp. And so I'm just going to color this on, really get some ink on there. Hot breath, stamp it, and when it dries you can go ahead and stamp with your marker as well. So you can color on a stamp and you can stamp with it. So it just gives you a little versatility when it comes to working with the markers as to what made them unique, what made them distress. Well, because they're reactive with water, they're great to watercolor, they're great to blend. Now you can look at that butterfly and that cool little creamy opacity that's on the top of that. It's pretty fun. Now it is a pigmented marker, so that's why the fine tip of this one is not plastic, it's actually felt. And it's kind of like if you've ever worked with alcohol ink, you know the mix it is, if you put too much of this on, kind of gets a little chalky buildup that you can wipe off. It's the same with the white pen. You know, in other words, when you put that on, if you go in and rub this, you'll be able to smear that pigment, right? If you wet it, nothing's going to happen to you because pigment's different than this. It's an ink, but it's not a translucent dye. It's a pigment ink. Okay, but it's water-based. It's pretty cool.
So when you want to use this, you want to make sure these are dry then?
No, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter?
No.
Okay.
No, you'll be able to blend. But like some people said, okay, well, then if I put a little bit white, and if I go in and put a little bit pink, can I color it and make a pastel pink? If you did, you would want to work with a dry brush, not a wet brush.
Okay.
Because whenever you add water to something opaque, you make it translucent. So it doesn't make sense to use a water brush when it comes to that. Now, let's talk about, it's cool, it's a good white, I really like it. So let's talk about using these markers in a class environment. If you're going to teach with them, or if you're going to demo with them, just a couple of tips. First of all, because this is water-based, and this will work the same with ink pads as it does with markers, Ranger's had a product for years that a lot of people don't know about, which is called ink refresher. And this is a resin, so you can see it's actually a clear resin in there that is designed to rehydrate water-based products. Rehydrate, not re-ink. So you gotta remember that. So if you've had a distress pad or a marker and you've used it, and you've colored with it, and you've done whatever, you use the ink in it. But if you're teaching with these markers and they're leaving the caps off, or even when you teach with ink pads, and you know that they're kind of drying out, they're not really as wet as they were, but there's still color in there, you can spritz this on an ink pad and it will rehydrate back to a brand new pad. You can spritz this on the table and you can actually get your markers. I'll show you on this one. I'll spritz a little bit in there. And maybe I'll take, I'm going to start with aged mahogany. I'm just going to get a little bit of that resin in the tip of it, and that's going to kind of soak into the pen. So when I first go to use this pen, it's going to be super light, but as that resin works up into the nib of this pen, you're going to see how wet that color becomes. And so that becomes my pen. So see, if you have customers that come in and they want their markers to be super, super wet to color with, there you go. That's just from using refresher. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Because sometimes I want them really, really wet. Same thing with your ink pads. If they're doing a lot of direct to paper or direct to surface and they're not getting all the ink out, but man, they're getting a little dry, just rehydrate them and they're back to life. So I want to show you a technique with ink refresher. It's not what it's designed to do, but that's what makes it a technique. So
Can I ask one question?
yeah, go right ahead.
Do all the ink pads fit in your tray?
Do all the ink pads fit in this top tray?
Yeah.
They don't fit in the top tray.
No, how many fit in the top tray?
24.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, in the top. But you can fit all of them down.